The day the bulldozers rolled in, I knew something was wrong, but I never imagined that by the end of it, I'd legally own the HOA's brand new clubhouse. If you think warnings don't matter, stay with me, because this story proves what happens when arrogance ignores paperwork. I live on a quiet corner lot, the kind with an odd angle most developers hate. When I bought it, I paid extra for a professional survey, steel markers driven deep into the ground, and copies filed with the county. That survey mattered, because my property line didn't run where people assumed it did. It cut straight through a patch of grass the HOA treated like common land. 2 years later, the HOA announced plans for a new clubhouse, bigger, louder, more prestigious. At the planning meeting, I stood up and calmly explained that part of their proposed footprint crossed onto my land. I showed the survey. I pointed out the markers. I even emailed copies afterward. They smiled politely and told me their engineers had it handled. A month later, stakes appeared in the ground, bright orange, directly past my boundary. I emailed again. I sent certified letters. I attached maps, measurements, and county records. The HOA president replied once dismissively, saying their attorney confirmed everything was fine. Construction would proceed as scheduled. Then the machines arrived. Watching excavators tear into soil you legally own feels surreal. I walked out with my survey in hand and told the site manager they were trespassing. He shrugged and said he followed HOA orders. By the end of the week, concrete footings were poured squarely across my property line. I documented everything: photos, videos, drone shots, timestamps. Neighbors told me to let it go. The HOA had money, lawyers, influence. I didn't argue. I just filed a formal notice of encroachment with the county and sent one final warning. It explained clearly that continued construction would forfeit any claim they had to that structure under state law. They ignored it. Construction finished. A ribbon-cutting ceremony followed. Smiling board members posed in front of a building partially sitting on my land. Applause echoed while I stood across the street, quiet, patient, and certain. Because the law doesn't care about applause, it cares about records. And every record was on my side. That certainty came from preparation, not luck. I wasn't angry. I was methodical. I reread statutes about adverse construction, encroachment remedies, and forfeiture clauses. I organized emails chronologically, highlighted dismissals, and preserved certified mail receipts. Every step they skipped, I documented. Every warning they ignored, I logged. When people underestimate you, patience becomes leverage. And leverage, applied correctly, changes outcomes. Soon, that leverage would turn their celebration into a lesson no board forgets ever. The HOA didn't realize they'd crossed the point of no return until the certified letter landed on their desk, stamped final notice. By then, the clubhouse was framed, roofed, and halfway furnished. They assumed I was bluffing, just another homeowner making noise. That assumption would cost them more than money. I hired a land use attorney the same day the concrete cured. He didn't raise his voice or promise drama. He smiled and said, "This is clean. Encroachment cases usually drag on because boundaries are vague. Mine weren't. Steel pins, county filings, written warnings, photos of active construction after notice. It was textbook. We filed a formal complaint requesting immediate injunction and asserting ownership interest over the encroached structure. The HOA's lawyers responded with confidence, arguing implied consent, community benefit, and minor boundary deviation. My attorney countered with statutes they'd ignored and case law they'd never bothered to read. The judge scheduled a site visit. That visit changed everything. Standing in the grass with survey flags fluttering, the judge listened as my attorney walked the property lines step by step. He measured. He pointed. He showed where the clubhouse wall crossed nearly 12 feet onto my land. The HOA president tried to argue intent. The judge stopped him and asked one question. "Were you warned in writing before construction?" The answer was yes. The injunction was granted immediately. The clubhouse closed before it ever officially opened. The HOA board panicked. Emergency meetings followed. Emails flew. They offered to buy the strip of land. I declined. They offered to pay damages and move the wall. I declined again. Under state law, continued construction after formal notice triggered forfeiture rights. They had gambled and lost. Next came mediation. Their tone changed completely. No smiles, no dismissals, just urgency. They wanted to settle quietly. I wanted clarity. The law allowed me to claim ownership of the encroaching portion or demand removal at their expense. Removal would cost them more than the entire project budget. I didn't threaten. I didn't gloat. I asked one simple question. Why should I accept less than what the law already gives me? No one answered. Neighbors started choosing sides. Some blamed me for being difficult. Others quietly thanked me for standing up to a board that had steamrolled residents for years. The clubhouse sat dark, fenced off, a monument to arrogance. Then the HOA's insurance carrier stepped in. Insurers don't care about pride. They care about exposure. They reviewed the file and sent a letter that shifted the entire balance. Coverage would be denied due to willful disregard of notice. Any judgment would come straight from HOA funds. That's when the board realized this wasn't a nuisance complaint. It was an existential problem, and it was about to get worse. Once the insurance carrier denied coverage, panic settled over the HOA like fog. Assessments were discussed. Special fees floated. Residents who'd applauded the clubhouse idea suddenly wanted answers. How did the board ignore warnings? Why wasn't this resolved before construction? The board's authority cracked under its own paperwork. My attorney advised patience. We let the injunction do its work. Without access, the clubhouse became a liability instead of an asset. Utilities sat idle. Maintenance costs piled up. Vendors demanded payment. Every week the building stayed closed, strengthened my position. The HOA requested another round of mediation, this time with different representatives. Their new tone was apologetic, almost deferential. They offered to deed me the encroached strip and restore the rest. I declined again. The issue wasn't just the land. It was the structure built on it. Under the statute, ownership could transfer entirely if removal was impractical. Their own engineers admitted partial demolition would compromise the building. The mediator asked what I wanted. I told him the truth. I wanted resolution consistent with the law. If that meant ownership, so be it. If it meant removal, that was their choice. Silence followed. The board tried a different tactic. They held a community vote to pressure me. Flyers circulated suggesting my stubbornness was costing neighbors money. At the meeting, residents vented. I attended quietly and asked to speak. I showed the emails, the certified letters, the survey pins photographed before construction. I explained calmly that this could have been avoided at any time. The room shifted. Anger redirected. A motion passed to remove the HOA president. Another followed to replace legal counsel. Too late to undo the past, but enough to signal change. The judge ordered a final hearing to determine remedies. On the morning of court, the HOA's attorney approached mine with an offer. Full transfer of the clubhouse and encroached land to me, in exchange for waiving damages. It was the first offer aligned with reality. We reviewed the terms carefully. The deed would be clean. The HOA would retain an easement for access only if I approved. Maintenance and taxes would be mine. The structure legally would belong to me. I agreed. The courtroom was quiet when the settlement was read into record. No gavel slam, no drama, just signatures and consequences. By ignoring warnings, the HOA had built a building they no longer owned. Walking out, a board member asked what I planned to do with it. I said I hadn't decided. That answer bothered them more than anything else. Because uncertainty is terrifying when you no longer control outcomes. And now, control had changed hands. Ownership didn't feel real until the keys were handed over. A small ring, labeled neatly, transferred without ceremony. The HOA clubhouse, once their crown jewel, was now mine. No applause, no speeches. Just a quiet, irreversible shift of power backed by recorded deeds. The neighborhood reaction was immediate. Rumors spread faster than facts. Some people assumed I'd shut the place down out of spite. Others worried I'd sell it to a developer or turn it into something disruptive. I let the speculation run. After months of being ignored, silence worked in my favor. Legally, the transition was clean. The county recorded the transfer. Property tax assessments updated. Utility accounts changed names. The HOA's access was terminated pending a written agreement. Suddenly, a board that once dictated parking rules had to request permission just to step inside a building they'd paid for. I walked through the clubhouse alone that first evening. The space was pristine, unused, and echoing. A kitchen no one had cooked in. Tables no one had gathered around. Walls decorated with framed slogans about community and shared values. The irony wasn't lost on me. The HOA sent a formal request to lease the building back for events. I declined. Another request followed, asking for temporary use during holidays. I declined again. I wasn't being petty. I was being cautious. Any use agreement could weaken my position if disputes arose later. Instead, I commissioned an independent inspection. Electrical, structural, fire, safety, everything. If my name was on the deed, responsibility followed. The report came back solid. High-quality construction. They hadn't cut corners, just boundaries. Neighbors started approaching me directly. Some apologized. Some thanked me. A few asked if I'd consider allowing limited access for community functions. I listened, but I didn't commit. The building had become leverage, and leverage should never be given away cheaply. The HOA board changed almost entirely within months. New leadership ran on transparency and restraint. They sent a letter acknowledging past failures and promising reform. I appreciated the gesture, But letters don't undo foundations poured in the wrong place. Eventually, I made a decision. I announced my plan at a community meeting. I would convert the clubhouse into a privately owned event space and lease it back to residents at fair market rates, with clear rules and no HOA control. The revenue would cover taxes, maintenance, and improvements. Access would be equal, not political. The reaction was mixed, then thoughtful. People realized something important. The clubhouse hadn't been lost. It had just changed hands because of negligence. As I left the meeting, I understood something else too. Warnings only matter if someone listens. When they don't, consequences become teachers. And this lesson wasn't finished yet. A year later, the clubhouse no longer symbolized conflict. It symbolized accountability. The sign out front didn't carry the HOA's logo anymore. It carried a neutral name, simple and professional. Because ownership had changed not just legally, but philosophically. The event space stayed busy. Birthday parties, small weddings, community workshops. Residents booked it like any other venue, paid transparent rates, and followed clear rules. There were no favors, no power plays, no whispered approvals. For the first time, the building actually served the community instead of a board's ego. The HOA adjusted. Without their prestige project, they became quieter, more cautious. Meeting minutes shortened. Enforcement letters decreased. When property questions came up, surveys were ordered instead of assumptions made. My situation became a case study cited by their new attorney whenever someone suggested cutting corners. Occasionally, a new resident would ask why the HOA didn't own its own clubhouse. Longtime neighbors would glance my way and tell the story carefully, emphasizing one lesson: warnings matter. I kept every document archived, not because I needed them anymore, but because records protect people who plan ahead. Too many homeowners assume authority replaces law. It doesn't. Paperwork does. The former HOA president moved away quietly. I never spoke to him again. There was nothing left to say. The outcome wasn't personal. It was procedural. He'd ignored boundaries, literal and legal, and paid the price through an institution he thought untouchable. Sometimes, when I lock up at night, I remember standing in the grass watching bulldozers cross steel survey pins. The frustration, the disbelief, the neighbors telling me to back down. If I had listened to them, the clubhouse would still belong to the HOA, and the lesson would never have been learned. Instead, I trusted preparation over pressure, patience over outrage, process over noise. Owning the clubhouse was never the goal. Respecting property lines was. Ownership was just the consequence of someone else's refusal to listen. If there's a point to all this, it's simple. Speak up early. Document everything. And when authority dismisses you, don't match their volume. Match their confidence with proof. Because when the dust settles, the law remembers what people forget. And sometimes, if you're careful and consistent, you don't just protect what's yours. You inherit what they shouldn't have taken.